Welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, October 30th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about CNN's brand new polls in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and a set of polls they've conducted in the battleground states over the past 2 weeks that give us broader context as to where CNN, a reputable news source, believes the current state of the race is based on their polling data that comes in the final stretch of the campaign season, likely their last polls that they will be releasing of the cycle, alongside many others that have announced that this is their final set of polls before the cycle ends. A really exciting time for the election and a really close one that we will be watching over the final 6 days. Now, before this video gets started, I just wanted to say, if you've been watching me for quite some time, you might remember back in 2020, I made a lot of videos leading up to the 2020 election, but October 30th is a day that I remember very often because I use it as an audio check. When I used October 30th, 2020 as this audio check every time I record my video. I always do like a pre-record for just a few seconds to make sure the microphone's working. And so it feels very full circle that I'm getting back into the election year. I started that in 2020 on October 30th, and now I'm doing it again. So really interesting stuff. You really probably don't care. Just a bit of lore on the background of my channel. But real stuff here. What we're talking about are substantive data points that give us a general sense and direction of where the vice president is today, where the former president is, and what, again, CNN is telling us about the current state of the race. Now, I will say, CNN is not the perfect pollster. They are by no means what I would consider to be the gold standard when it comes down to polling data at large. That isn't to say they aren't reputable, but they're not this 100% accuracy type of poll. In fact, there are no polls out there that I would say are the gold standard across multiple states. There obviously are states where I say this poll has been accurate pretty much all the time. Ann Seltzer and the Des Moines Register, they do a really good job in Iowa. They are largely seen as the gold standard for that state. You can see in states like Pennsylvania, you have Susquehanna University, other firms like Franklin and Marshall that are long known as very reputable sources within the state. Again, a lot of the times what we find from those pollsters is they generally are correct. What CNN does a good job at doing is getting general aggregates across states. Back in 2022, they were one of the only pollsters to really call the margin for John Fetterman very early on, actually, in that final stretch of the campaign, showing John Fetterman with a 5-point lead, largely in line with what many of the other sources had said. But again, CNN is not some firm here that is just consistently wrong or consistently right. Sometimes they get things spot on. It was off by 0.1%, and obviously the polls don't predict down to that margin, so really they weren't off by any amount. But in some cases, they do inaccurately predict elections. I do want to put merit in it, though, because I do trust the polling firm, and I do believe that they outsource what they do with SSRS correctly, and they get us some good data that helps formulate our response to the election and our predictions for the election. And so enough jibber-jabber talking about CNN's validity and talking about the poll itself. I'm focused on the numbers that we are getting from these polls, the numbers that help us build out an electoral map. And the numbers here are actually quite strong for the vice president, might I say, leads that I'm quite surprised to see in the final stretch of the campaign, given how close it has been thus far. And so, to make things easy, they have a long article here where they really break it down into the competitive Senate races. They take a look at black voters, they look at Asian American voters, they look at all different types of voters, broken down on demographic group, education, age, whatever it might be. What I'm focused on are these top line numbers, because at the end of the day, as much as Kamala Harris and Donald Trump might have changes in demographic makeup and coalitions from the 2020 and 2016 elections, if you're winning the election, you're winning the election, and what builds you up matters afterwards. But as of right now, it's about winning the election, and in the final 6 days, we're mostly going to be spending our time looking at the top line numbers, unless there's major substantive changes in the crosstabs that are worth exploring. But here on out, we are in that final crunch and final stretch of the campaign. And so in Michigan, Kamala Harris holds a lead over Donald Trump of 48-43. That's a 5-point advantage that is in line with the recent data point that we talked about just yesterday in this battleground state, showing Kamala Harris with a 5-point lead as well. Now, 5-point leads aren't things that, mean that she's guaranteed to win the state. It's a good sign, and 5 points is absolutely where you would want to be if you are the vice president's team. At the same time, things can be wrong. We've seen polling errors beyond 5 points in midterm elections, in congressional special elections, in presidential elections, but it does make a difference, especially when you have reputable data points saying, hey, wait a minute, Kamala Harris holds a 5-point lead in the state of Michigan. It matters now. It will matter on election day. Moving over to the state of Wisconsin, you also have to take a look there too. What are they telling us about this battleground state? Well, Kamala Harris has a 6-point lead according to CNN's poll across the state. Now, Wisconsin's not a state that is easy for the vice president. This is a state that I'd argue is going to be the closest, if not Pennsylvania, but could be the second closest out of the three. I expect Michigan to vote to the left of Wisconsin, at least at this point in time. But, and I will say but, Wisconsin has been surprisingly strong, not only for Kamala Harris, but if you remember back in the day and age where we were working with Vice President or President Joe Biden as the nominee, he actually was performing the best in the state of Wisconsin when compared to some other states. So it's really interesting. Wisconsin has been holding out, at least in the polls here, a bit for the Democratic candidates. Kamala Harris held a narrow advantage in Wisconsin, and it seems to be expanding ever so slightly based on the data that we're looking at here. Wisconsin, Kamala Harris at 51 to 45. And then we move over to the next state, the state of Pennsylvania, where we're seeing a tie. Now, this isn't really shocking, right? I think Pennsylvania has always been close. We talked about Michigan, which had 5 points on Susquehanna University. Wisconsin has been pretty good, but Pennsylvania's been close, and Pennsylvania should be close. Both the Trump and Harris team have spent over $100 million in this state alone. You have seen time and time again the relentless ads. If you live in Pennsylvania, and if you're watching my channel and you live in Pennsylvania, you know just how much the media markets are being flooded through the election. This is the final stretch. I mean, you're going to see that the vice president and Governor Walz, they are going to be visiting Pennsylvania quite heavily. Former President Trump and Senator J.D. Vance, they are going to be across the state of Pennsylvania. We've started to see some advertisements being pulled from states like Nevada and advertisements being pulled from states like Michigan on both sides of the aisle to reallocate funding in Pennsylvania. The good news for Democrats, and I will say it has been a constant trend, that because they have more money, they have more ability to reach across the country. And so what we have seen thus far is that Kamala Harris's campaign has outspent the Trump team in every single battleground state, with the exception of Pennsylvania, where they are even. Donald Trump's team sees Kamala Harris puts in a $3 million ad buy, so do they. The Kamala Harris team sees that Donald Trump's doing 2 rallies, so do they. The investments into Pennsylvania is so heavy, and it makes sense that it's the closest battleground state at this point, where both candidates are hovering around 48%. And so at face value, these are actually really good results out of Wisconsin and Michigan, and mediocre results out of Pennsylvania, but nothing more than what you can expect, given what the national numbers tell us. Up nationwide, 1.3% advantage for Kamala Harris, but looking at Pennsylvania, it is broken down to an even margin, meaning it's less than 1%, where Donald Trump, now this is before 538, has included the tied poll. I imagine it'll slightly reduce, but Donald Trump should still hold that advantage according to 538. But they have Donald Trump up by 0.4% because of a wide range of recent polls. A lot of Republican firms, I might add, Atlas Intel, Republican firm, right? You're seeing, generally speaking, a lot of these numbers that are good for Donald Trump are Republican firms, but looking at that 0.4% advantage, it's nothing statistically significant. In fact, it is the trend line we have seen in not only Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin, 0.3, in Nevada, 0.1. It is so exceptionally close, so exceptionally narrow, and now CNN is putting something different on our laps and saying, wait a minute, it's not as close as you think. Kamala Harris holds a 5-point lead in Michigan, a 6-point lead in Wisconsin, and she's tied in Pennsylvania. I believe the tied number. I don't believe the 5 and 6-point lead, but I do think it is possible that Kamala Harris holds a lead in these states because, again, they are outspending Donald Trump. They have a Midwestern governor on the ticket, Tim Walz. They know how to play to the base in the Rust Belt, and although it may not be something that's slam dunking the election, a victory of 1 point or 19 points makes no difference in the amount of electoral votes you get from a battleground state. And so Kamala Harris holding that narrow advantage makes a difference. Now, CNN also did another set of polls extending beyond the Rust Belt. And that's what I wanted to talk about too. They haven't done Georgia and North Carolina recently. They did them back in September, and we saw some numbers coming around the time of early October or late September. But what we were looking at recently is a new data point in Arizona and Nevada. Now, this was released yesterday. So this is something different than what we've been working with. The final CNN poll in Arizona, we can actually just see it down here, shows Kamala Harris with a 1-point lead. Now, the former poll they did, the one dated back a month ago, showed Donald Trump with a 5-point lead according to CNN. So about a 6-point difference and change in a matter of weeks. In Nevada, it's about 48 for Trump and 47 for Harris. And we're going to visualize this on an electoral map in just a moment. But to put things into perspective, what they're telling us, Arizona's blue, Wisconsin and Michigan are blue, Pennsylvania's a tie, and Nevada is red. Georgia and North Carolina, largely untouched because we don't have any polls there. But let's take a look at what that means for an electoral college map. And so on your screen right now is the electoral college at baseline. Kamala Harris at the minimum will be at 226 electoral votes. Donald Trump at the minimum will be at 219 electoral votes. Both campaigns pretty much came into realization very quickly that the electoral map was going to be decided by 7 battleground states. In 2020, it was around 11 or 12 battleground states. In 2016, based on the polling data, the expectations were 14 to 15 battleground states. In 2012, you were hovering around 11 to 12 battleground states. And in 2008, you were talking anywhere from 16 to 17 to 18 in theory battleground states. But by the time the election came around, Barack Obama had slam dunked the majority of them. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were all states Barack Obama won in 2008 by double digits, just to put things into perspective for how far they have fallen from the Democratic Party, but how much they have returned to being true and total battleground states. And so 93 electoral votes make up the difference between the candidates here. 93 electoral votes, and let's visualize it based on what CNN is telling us. If we're looking at it from face value, a 1-point lead in Nevada is a lean red state. A 1-point lead in Arizona, lean blue state. That bumps up Donald Trump to 225 and Kamala Harris to 237. Now, for the sake of fairness, I don't think it's fair to leave North Carolina and Georgia uncharacterized. They will have a distinction on election night, and they will be called in the coming days or on election night, depending on how fast they count their ballots. And so what does that mean? Well, as of right now, Georgia and North Carolina hold narrow advantages for the former president. You can take a look at those data points. North Carolina, Georgia. Georgia is a 1.8% state. North Carolina is a 1.1% state. That's enough to be a lean red state. And so that really jumps up Donald Trump to 257, puts him well within reach of winning the presidency. Give him Michigan, he wins. Give him Pennsylvania, he wins. Wisconsin, he's right there. But if he's winning Wisconsin, chances are he's winning other states. But CNN rejects this. They say Kamala Harris wins Arizona. She also wins Wisconsin by 6 points. She wins Michigan by 5 points, and it's Pennsylvania. That's the tie. Now, hear me when I say this. If Kamala Harris wins Wisconsin by 6 and Michigan by 5, she wins the election. She'll win Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and likely North Carolina and Georgia. She'd likely clean sweep the 7 battleground states. So something's not giving here, which is why I say I err on the side of caution in saying I think the race is a lot closer to what the Pennsylvania number is saying rather than what the Wisconsin and Michigan numbers are saying. Well, you can't deny it's always good news when you find a poll in your favor because it shows that of the electorate that they choose, the sample size that is representative supposedly of the state, that at least amongst those voters, they're choosing the vice president. And while it may not end up being a 6-point lead in Wisconsin, it could be a sign that she's on track for a 0.6% lead, like that of Biden back in 2020. Or that the 5-point lead in Michigan would be cut in half, just like in 2020 when Biden led by 4 on election day and won by 2.8. If she's leading by 5 now, she might win by 3.2. I don't know. I'm not here to say that the polling errors are going to be the same, but just using that as an example. And so reducing down Pennsylvania, it's possible, even though Donald Trump holds the narrow advantage right now in the polls, that the tie here goes to show exactly what we've known all along, that the election will come down through the pesky, pesky state of Pennsylvania because it, evades and weaves back and forth between candidates, Republicans and Democrats. It is a battleground state. It is a swing state and has been for a very long time. They're no stranger to knocking on doors. They're no stranger to relentless phone calls, bombarding advertisements, constant rallies, a major media presence. This is not new to Pennsylvania, which is why both campaigns knew that the election would run right through it. When Kamala Harris launched her VP rally, August 6th, 2024, when she announced Governor Tim Walz, she did it in none other than in the state of Pennsylvania. She knew that this would be a state that made a major difference in the cycle, and it would be the reason she wins or the reason she loses. The same thing for the Trump team. Now, I will say, if I was on the Republican side, I would not be seeing displays of confidence, like this one, that tell me that the Republicans internally believe they're on track to win Pennsylvania. Donald Trump already stoking voter fraud fears in Pennsylvania tells me something about their internal numbers aren't looking too great. Now, I'm not here to discount Donald Trump can win Pennsylvania, but it is never the sign of a winning candidate to preemptively say, they're going to steal Pennsylvania from me. Because what does that tell us? He thinks he's going to lose Pennsylvania. Everybody, and I hope this is the case, but I think everybody knows 2020 election was not stolen. That is just fact of the matter. There is no substantial evidence in any way that says that the 2020 election was stolen. The only people who really do truly believe it, and I know there are a lot of Republicans out there that claim to say they believe it, but they don't. I can tell you right now, the former president does not believe he genuinely lost the election. These people are saying these things because it benefits them. It set Donald Trump up for a 2024 Republican primary. It set up all these Republicans to coalesce around a movement fueled by the big lie. All of these things were really just intentional efforts, and I think that's what we're starting to see. But it is really interesting to me because what I have seen thus far, and I talk about this all the time, is that ranging from people like Chris LaSavita, Donald Trump's senior campaign advisor, to his campaign managers, to Lara Trump, chair of the RNC, to Donald Trump himself, is constant displays of confidence. This election will be, in their eyes, too big to rig. That this election will be easily won by the Republican Party and there should be no concerns as long as their base gets out and votes. Then all of a sudden, right before the election, Pennsylvania is rigged. All of a sudden, right before the election, they're saying, this state is being taken from us. Okay, Why? Why do you say that? There is no substantial evidence either. Obviously, very clearly, nothing was provided to the Board of Elections office. Nothing was provided to the United States Supreme Court, to the local courts in Pennsylvania. Nothing, because there is nothing there. But stoking fears of it tells me there's something off about the internal data points in there. And we'll talk about this in a later video. I don't want to get too far off here, but I will say, based on some of these numbers here, we know Pennsylvania's close. Trump team seems to be worrying a lot more than they did, especially when they were running under Biden. And it's going to be a very close race. The 19 electoral votes here are emphasized even further by the CNN polls that show good signs in the Rust Belt, but Pennsylvania is still that missing piece of the puzzle. Now, good news for Kamala Harris. A new poll out of YouGov today shows Pennsylvania with a 2-point lead for the vice president. So starting to see some returns here in the final stretch, moving in the opposite direction of where the polls had been moving, more towards Trump, now more towards Harris. It's not enough to say that anything is secure and solid, but the signs are there that Kamala Harris might be on track to win this election. Even though my most recent prediction, I have Donald Trump winning, a lot can change in a very short period of time in American politics, and we are just about to see that possibly if we get more data confirming those points over the next coming days in the final stretch of what is expected to be the closest presidential election of the 21st century. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.